And let me say it at the beginning, this reshaping can go either way. It can be towards the prosperous, inclusive, very well tuned in with the planet society, or it can equally powerfully drift into something that is very autocratic. It also can go into a very monopolistic societies, and believe it or not, it can drive our civilization down the drain, and possibly even the humanity as a whole. So all these options are on the table. So we have to be very cautious, and we need to become aware of the challenges which need to become the topics of a common space, of an open public space. They need to be discussed, and people then can take their own positions. And what I'm realizing is that many people really don't have the access to different types of opinions. And that's why we don't have a really good public discourse and good discussion, which can only foster then a more stable common ways forward. So with this invitation, let me share with you a couple of thoughts that I have on these global trends, and especially what is happening within them. I'm not going to have time to cover all of them, but I will touch those that are colored in orange a little bit more in details. So certainly there are three global trends that the entire planet, all countries, all people are sharing at this point. First one is climate change. And this climate change, we are facing the consequences of climate change everywhere. And let's not be mistaken, climate change circles are something natural. They've been happening over and over again in the last couple of million years. The challenge of our generation and our society is that with our interference, we caused a speed up of these climate changes, which means we deprived us humans and the natural ecosystems from getting adjusted in a natural way to these climate changes. Just a quick information. It is known through anthropological research that societies need about 8 generations to get used to new conditions and fully acknowledge them and accept them on their genetic behavior level. So, but what we did with this speed up climate changes, speeding up of climate changes, we forced 1 or maybe 2 generations to completely reshape. So we need to be aware of that. And that's why we need that much more engagement, that we can bring the awareness faster to every single individual in order to take an advantage of them and continue to exist on this planet Earth, along with these climate changes. More about that a little bit later. The second one, which of no doubt, is digitalization. Our civilization is basically defined by technological advances, and in the last 30, 40 years have been definitely defined by digitalization as one of the technology branches. So I'm going to dig deeper into this, but just the first thought is that the way how we see digitalization and this sort of already expectation that you have access to the bandwidth that you need, it's a Western world privilege. For how long more, I don't know, but at this point it still is the case. When we take a look at the general population, okay? So with that in mind, we will discuss this further later on. Of course, globalization is something that we're experiencing all the time, no matter which area we touch, no matter which portfolio we look at, one way or the other, globalization is influencing all sectors, either as the global, in the level of the global players, or on the local community, just dealing with the end consequences. And when we talk globalization today, what I'm inviting you into is to seriously pay attention to the joining points between global networks and global business models and local business models. I'm convinced that in the future, there will be a very important area really at this joining point, how to bring local identity, local authentic points of view, understandings and products and services as part of the overall solution and enrichment of a global solutions into the global networks. Of course, here again, we can have many different ways how this can end up, but let me share with you the one that I'm in favor of course, which is an open, inclusive, and very dynamic world. Through some discussions that I had the privilege to lead, my colleagues shared stories about global network-based companies where there are two really important elements that create opportunity for a long-standing, sustainable success. Whatever the success definition of success is, it's not necessarily constant growth, but it's stability, it's capacity to create capacity within the network to fully utilize the competences and potentials that the network has. And they use three basic principles, which I hope at least you will think about them, if not already accept them as your own. First is 100% transparency. So no matter how big the player in the network is, has access to all information that are part of the network. No business secrets, no side deals, no secrets about salaries or benefits. Everything is transparent and shared. The second one is that all cooperation is built on trust. And consequently, the third element comes in when I ask them, so how do you know what is the right move? How do you know what is the next right thing to do? And the answer was as simple as this. You just check with yourself. You do what you feel is right. But this answer is by far bigger and deeper than maybe at the first glance, because it requires a very sort of clean insight of every human being. Every human being needs to understand who she or he is, what is her or his relationship with the world, and what her or his decisions are based on. So to trust somebody with a full transparency and decision-making when they're doing what they feel is right is something very refreshing emerging. And it's not just idealistic, sort of futuristic concept. We had a privilege to talk with people who've been doing it, so managing these global networks by these three sort of simple rules, if you want, for years, you know, and they're successful, they're stable, and they are expanding their influence. And interesting enough, that goes really well along with the quantum physics theory, yeah, when it says that on a quantum level, the systems always know what is right, what is the truth, because they're connected with the universal truth. So think for a second, can you lead this way? Can you exercise this kind of management practice? We will need to support each other a lot in order to fully manifest these skills. But if we agree that this is the future, we can do it. I know we can do it because we have really some good case practices. The next big trend is of urbanization. Even today already on a global scale, which is slightly different on a European soil, we have 80% of people living in urbanized world, 80%. In Europe, it's a little bit over 60 because our concept of villages is really rich and very important. And I hope we will be able to nurture it with respect and bring specific types of solutions to the countryside, to rural areas, in order to preserve their uniqueness, because they bring a lot of diversity to the way how we can perceive the world and the way how we can engage. But in overall, it's 80% of the population. And no wonder that there is so much stress on different concepts of smart cities, inclusive cities, sustainable cities, and this will continue to grow, and there is no doubt. So solutions for urbanization will be a hot topics for many years to come. But of course, on all of these elements, pollution has a big impact. And through the pollution, we have a big impact on climate change. We have digitalization delivers additional pollution. So we need to be very much aware when we think digitalization to think about pollution as well. In globalization, it has, of course, a huge impact, especially through energy and through transport solutions. And urbanization, where really managing the pollution is one of the key challenges that every mayor, all citizens are facing today. And they are directly related also to the next, one of the next global trends, which is health. If I move on, we cannot overlook poverty, even though in Europe it's hard to talk about the poverty as we know it in some other parts of the world. We need to be aware that whenever you create a poverty area, at the edge between poverty and the stable and healthy world, if I can use this word, there is always a conflict. So let's ask ourselves, do we really want conflict or we want cooperation? If we want cooperation, we need to act in this spirit. We cannot just talk and sit comfortably back in our seats or in our sofas and just have a philosophical discussion about it. No, we need to go where this pollution is created. Many times we will realize that it has been created by the Western civilization and Western countries, and really act for the benefit of those local communities, because they're going to bring an enormous richness in the way how we perceive the world. So it's not just that they will take our business away, not rather contrary. Look how big the global population has become, and there is a bigger and bigger market. So which means more and more opportunities. Excuse me. So let's look at the poverty. It's something that if we get rid of, it's an enormous opportunity. And today we are at a critical phase, especially because this gap between rich and poor is growing. And if we not manage this sort of span and these differences, I can guarantee you our civilization will go down, because that's what the story of previous civilization is constantly bringing forward. Only if we want to listen and see, we will see that there has been many, many civilizations. 28 we acknowledge already, and we have been able to study really into details. And the message from those civilizations is very clear, that once the differences grow beyond the manageable control, the civilization started to fall into itself, you know, because the gap is so big. It creates conflicts, and too many people have nothing to lose. So they become violent, and revolutions started to rise. And if you want to have sustainable development, you don't want revolutions, you want evolutions. So we are all responsible for creating conditions for dramatic changes, which by definition, they bring big destructions. And I'm very much in favor into reshaping into evolutionary approach. But we need to see it that way. We need to give it a chance. And that doesn't mean that there will be no room for the future development. Rather contrary, that means that we will use our capacity in order to create a better world together. And that's what appeals to me. That's where I spend my energy. Of course, I cannot go beyond, but speak about health and pandemic. That is certainly one of the global trends that just came basically from nowhere, because we were sure that pandemics were just something of the past, or that they are always going to be just regional and we can always contain them. But the concept, if we believe it or not, whatever your beliefs are, But currently, the whole world has been challenged by pandemic and the definition of pandemic. So change management, I hope, sees this as one of the biggest opportunities, because there was neither one country that handled this really well. No matter which one you point, from China to US, to Europe, to Africa, to India, to Russia, wherever you go, you will see that governments have been seriously challenged, and companies as well, with pandemic consequences. So we need new types of organization of public health. We need two types of organizations for a general public to respond to these kind of challenges, to have some sort of civil society frameworks within which every individual can take part of the responsibility. I believe that that was the biggest failure of governments, that they forgot about people, that they think that they can solve this together with the global corporations. And it's rather opposite. You know, we don't really have good answers yet, because people have not been engaged. You know, we were pushed aside instead of asked to take responsibility, not the blame, which governments are, it's so easy for them to share with us, but also the responsibility for success. And I believe you guys have here an opportunity to prove yourself and to deliver on the ground some good solutions. And of course, civilizational paradigm, which I'm going to address now. Let's see how much more time I have, not much. So quickly in my closing remarks. So if I just show, and I'm not going to describe all these slides that you have in the presentation that will be shared with you, but I'd like to bring a little attention to the climate change again. And please take a look at my presentation for the details. But I do believe that currently we have three big tools on the table in order to manage climate change, but also everything related to human intervention with the nature. One are, of course, is UN Agenda for Sustainable Development. And as much as this was one of the first serious global visions that were with transparent commitments, we can see many challenges, and let's address them. Let's not just throw this tool away, but let's address them. And one of them is the lack of global governance, no enforcement power, lack of new organizational design that can absorb the results and processes and solutions that come out of sustainable development goals. Lack of progressive capacities on the ground. Why don't we take care of this? Because it's not paid well, but if you want to deliver on sustainable development goals, you need this kind of tools on the ground. And of course, political sincerity. You know, this declaration was signed by prime ministers of most of the countries, but none is delivering. So we have work to do. The second one is, of course, Green Deal, European Green Deal, which inspired many countries around the world as well and challenged them. And now we are together in this process of trying to find also the global solution. But again, this Green Deal has clear goals, has a clear strategy, emerging action plans. It has dedicated instruments, even very good financial tools. But the same applies to European Green Deal as to the Sustainable Development Goals. Lack of efficient governance, lack of new organizational design, lack of progressive capacities on the ground, and lack of political sincerity. You know, two really powerful tools with the same kind of weak points, which somehow we don't want to address. And we keep pushing, even now pouring money into this, but without the mentioned tools, we're not going to deliver. And last but not least, finally, circular economy, with declaration of the EU of circular economy being the economical model of the future for the EU. It became also the central part of our engagement. And of course, it brought a lot of great consequences and hopes related to redesign, rethinking, reduce, repair, recycle, reuse. Yeah? But what are the challenges? The challenges, one of the biggest one is again that you can help to address. is, can we decouple the economical growth from the environmental exploitation? If we don't do that, we're in serious trouble. And also, we need to be aware that there is no such a thing as 100% of circular economy. No matter how good we become in this, there will always be other parts that need to be managed well, and that they can be a big problem if we don't manage them. We have similar challenge as in other two tools, which is capacity building on the ground. And of course, awareness building, which we are addressing now better and better, but capacity is still missing. So let me just briefly now address the digitalization, where I need to talk to you about the big data and the next mining paradise, as they call it. But here we have a serious challenge because the immense amount of data are being created every day by the common use of digital devices and software users, I mean, millions of users around the world. But do we question the use of this data at all? The purpose for data collection? I mean, here we can really start asking serious questions about upgrading technology versus upgrading the life conditions. Are we really serving, when we deliver new technological solutions, are we serving the interests of better society, or we are serving even bigger, the interests of bigger dominance? We need to discuss this. Are we racing to the bottom, or are we racing into elevation of quality of life? And let me be even more concrete. Our attitude towards this collected data. For example, in the world right now, we have 3 mega trends. One is very well advocated by China, by Russia, which is the state ownership. The other one is US, which is a corporate ownership and possibly without any regulation. And there is a EU and Japan, which stand together for the users-based ownership and users protection regulation. Where would you like to be? I mean, it's probably the combination of all, but we need to talk about it, and we need to make sure that regulation is not always way back behind the technology. Because, like, for example, cryptocurrency right now, it's really emerging as a huge money generator, and of course the one that sucks the money into the system, but there is no regulation. Do you really want to give the money into this big system without any regulatory interventions? So whoever owns whatever can do whatever she or he wants. Do you want to play in that kind of world? And of course, there are additional topics that are really calling for an in-depth public discussions, like concept of ownership, which is just one of them, but along with accountability and stewardship over assets of next generation. Because these are not our assets, my dear friends. These are assets of our next generation. Not only kids, but our grandkids. So are we aware of that when we are setting up the systems? Where is the focus? Is it on the ownership, or is it on the user's rights? Is it on the individual rights, or is it on the corporate rights? Is it focused on opportunity or on responsibility? I would claim that these need to work together, but do they? These are tough questions, and politicians are just not up to them. Public needs to get involved. And least but not least, of course, ethical discourse on the fourth industrial revolution or evolution and artificial intelligence. So what are the benefits of the humanity from these tech developments? Are we aware of them? Do we have legislation that actually works in that way? And I'm not gonna try to get too deep, but I need to mention surveillance capitalism. And please, please read about that. Because this is now emerging out of the internet and digital tools being used to propagate certain products and services, trying to guess your behavior and your needs, and then serve those needs that you have and that behavior you have. But right now, we are already moving into the surveillance capitalism. What does it mean? Well, that means that the owners of data and the owners of infrastructure are defining the future that we need to live. They tell us what is supposed to be our future, what are supposed to be our needs, what is supposed to be our behavior. Think about it. I hope you're with me on this one. And please read about it. And let me now finish with the reason why in March last year, when I returned from Brussels and I came right to the beginning of the pandemic, I started to put some thoughts together, and based on my previous engagements within the International System Size Society, this model of eco-civilization emerged. You can take a closer look of it in the file, but basically we are challenging the definition of civilization, looking at past civilization, trying to learn from them and see what is the society that we, people who are gathering now around this concept, what is the society we want to live in? Let's imagine it, because if we can imagine it, we can deliver. Because everything that is going around us, somebody imagined, somebody started to deliver. And let's dare to continue and maybe reshape a bit more sustainable, inclusive, and open society that we have right now. Because the old systems are being threatened, and you can see how they resist. You know, we're getting more and more controlled. We are getting more and more hierarchical again. So it's still time. It's still time that we discuss it, not with revolution, but with the understanding that if we want to serve our grandchildren, if we want to be ancestors of our grandchildren, we need to have a public discussion. We need to start imagining the future that we want to live. And what couple of things we have learned so far through the discussions, and I really prepared for you a bit more detailed explanation about what are the conclusions and or what are already the understandings that we accumulated in the last year in my presentation, but let me just share last thoughts with you. The fact is that civilizations were rising, they had the peak, and they were falling, and they, one after the other, you know, and one after the other disappeared, the trace of them for actually many years, sometimes for 200-300 years before we rediscovered them. But there are some specifics of our civilization which we need to take into account, and there might be a chance not to repeat the destiny of past civilization, but co-create our destination consciously in the future. One is that there is no more territory to conquer on this planet Earth. And all land has been already registered in books. So we create a virtual world. And of course, here we can consciously reshape the rules. So what's going to be the virtual world? And many generations, younger generations, for them, it's already hard to divide, to separate these two worlds. They are basically integrating one big integrated world for them. Or space. But are we going to take this, which society, which societal rules we're going to take to space? Are we going to take the rules of fourth industrial revolution, of singularity, of transhumanism, where, you know, humans don't really play much an important role anymore? Or are we going to be able to use technology to serve us and to always have a button and the name responsible for that button at the end of every artificial intelligence? So we have a chance, because for the first time in the history, as we know it, we have data about the conditions of the entire world available, of the entire world. So we can see today in the real time what's happening. So let's hope we are wise enough that we can use it in order to prevent something that the old civilizations didn't have a capacity for.
Thank you very much, Violeta.
I think, yes. Let me just finish with one last thought. Reinvention and change management are two incredibly important rules. And if it was in the past 70 years to change the structures of organizations, today that is 2 to 3 years. So these issues are more important than ever. Thank you.